How many of you in this room know how to tie a necktie? Show of hands? Excellent. So you're telling me that by a show of hands, you know the difference between a half Windsor and, say, a half Nelson? No. Well, that's good that you do, because I need help tying my tie tonight. But really, this speech is not about tying ties as much as it is about giving and receiving good advice. Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters and guests, when we think about advice, we get conflicted feelings because it's something that we give away for free and nobody wants to take it. And we know it's good, right? But advice is like a flu shot. It's easy to give, kind of painful to receive, isn't it? And so there are times, though, that we actually solicit advice. Whether it be preparing for a Toastmaster speech, maybe starting a new business, or preparing for that big presentation, we start looking for advice. And so tonight, this necktie is a metaphor for your next speech, your new business, or your big presentation. And so if I'm looking for advice on how to tie my tie, and let me tell you what my goal is. I want this wide part of the tie to meet my waistband. So I want some input from you now. I'm asking for advice. Where do I start? Do I start here? Should the ends of the tie be shorter or longer? Which way? I only have 7 minutes, people. It's not a trick question. Higher? Lower? Higher?
The wide end has to be longer.
Longer?
Yeah.
Here?
More.
More? Yeah. More? Okay. All right, we'll try it. Now, neckties are not as popular a clothing item as they used to be with the casual Fridays and whatnot, but I like to think that neckties are the upside-down exclamation point that complete a man's ensemble. And so if you are not used to wearing ties, what do you think? What have we learned here about advice?
You're too tall.
I think it's pretty clear that advice by consensus is no advice at all. If you go out, and this is what we do, when we have a question, we go to our friends, don't we? We go to the most affable people. To those who will give us advice that we want to hear. But that's not the case. When there are too many voices, you don't get a clear direction. You cannot ask advice from everybody. No matter how passionate you are about your new project, you can't go from person to person asking for real advice. You can publicize it, you can talk about it, you can share your vision, but be very careful about accepting advice in those situations. Just like the old adage, too many cooks spoil the broth. All right, so now I'm going to try this again. Now, I only want advice from men who wear ties on a daily basis. How many men wear ties on a daily basis? I've got two. I've got the real estate guy and the attorney. All right, I'll ask you guys, where should I start? Where should I start tying? Here?
About 2 or 3 inches of the thinner piece of tie from the neckband.
Up here?
Keep a little more.
Down here?
Up there, don't you think, Mike?
Another 2 inches.
All right. Well, let's give it a shot. Now, the knot I am tying tonight is a full Windsor. Yeah. The full Windsor, as far as tie knots go, is the symmetrical knot. There are 3 other knots that are asymmetrical. Because this is a symmetrical knot, it really goes best with button-down shirts. And it also works best because it's also the biggest knot. It also works best with thinner materials. So keep that in mind when you're tying your tie. We'll talk about the other knots in a little bit. This one's a little long. A little long.
Tighten the knot.
Tighten the knot, yeah. Yeah, but if I hitch up my pants, it's really too long. That's bad. Not too bad, though. So you see what I've done. I've narrowed down the focus of my advisors, haven't I? I've narrowed it down to people with expertise. Not just anybody off the street who's giving me pearls of wisdom, but people who actually know their business. They know their ties. They know how to tie it. All right, now I'm going to try this one more time. I'm going to ask my good friend James. As I start tying this tie, James, what I'd like you to do is to give me feedback, and if you think it's going to come out too long or too short, then let me know and I'll retie it as we speak. All right, so where should I start now?
The thinner should be down a little bit further.
Right
Down,
here?
there.
All right.
No,
Okay.
no, you went too far.
Too far? Okay.
Half an inch higher, there you go.
All right, thank you. As I said, this is the full Windsor. The other knots, of course, the half Windsor, which I've mentioned. There's also the 4 in hand. And the other knot that most people don't know about, and I really wasn't familiar with, is called the plait. And the plait is quite unusual in that it starts out with the reverse of the tie showing, so that the seam of the tie is showing. And when you are done tying the plait, the short end is still showing the seam. Quite unusual. So if you see anybody with a seam showing, then they've either tied their knot very poorly or they are purposely tying the plait.
Just one more detail, you need the dimple of the tie
Yes,
in the middle.
thank you.
So it's
I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
the tie should be, the knot should be tight, but your neck should not be tight.
Well, it's not too tight on my neck. My voice hasn't changed yet. All right. So you see what I've done now. Now I've narrowed down my advisor to one person. Not one person who is advising me from afar, but somebody who is involved in my discussion. He's involved in the process. He's there working with me. And this is my suggestion to you as you're looking for advice, whether it be for your speech or for your business or for that big presentation. Narrow down your group of advisors. Don't take it from everybody. Get someone who wants to be involved in the process, maybe 1 or maybe 2 advisors. Get advice, but use it sparingly. In fact, there is an old Yiddish proverb which I think speaks well to whether you're working on your new project or your last necktie, and it says, get good advice, but use your common sense. Mr. Toastmaster.